This podcast is brought to you by Primary Arms. Primary Arms seeks to provide the best shopping experience for everything firearms. With over 13,000 products from over 400 top brands, Primary Arms carries a complete selection of rifles, handguns, firearms parts, shooting gear, apparel, and more. Every order comes with a commitment to superior service, backed by fast shipping and an expert support team. Primary Arms, serving freedom since 2008. Find out more at frn.deals/PA. Welcome to the AR-15 podcast. This show is for you if you just bought your first rifle or if you've been building them for years. There is something we can all do to take our black rifles to the next level. My name is Nick Dooley, and I am joined as always by my co-host Garth Over.
How we doing tonight, bud?
Good. And tonight we have a guest that, well, we have been trying to get together and have him on the show, and through a series of unfortunate events, either on his end, our end, or the government's end, we have failed to do that until now. So we have Mohave Repeater with us tonight.
How's it going? Thanks for having me.
Yep. Thanks for coming on, and for any new listeners we have who just picked this up or are looking at it going, why are these rifle guys talking to somebody who has Repeater in their company name? Mm-hmm. Part of like learning with the rifle is as you go on, you start to look at things beyond just like, turning loud noises into money, or turning money into loud noises rather, because that's what I'm really good at. And you start to realize there's other things that go with it, because even if you're just at the range with friends, having communications and things like that really start to become very important. Especially if you start to lose line of sight or start to move into longer range. Mm-hmm. And then there's also just that general being prepared and preparedness mindset of always having communication.
Yeah, definitely.
100%.
So, Alex, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and your company then? Like, where'd you guys get your start?
Yeah, for sure. So I got my start in the Marine Corps. I was a communications guy during my time in service, contract as well after my time in service doing signals intelligence and electronic warfare. And now I run my business, Mohave Repeater, which is basically a solutions provider of communications equipment, training, and services for my customers. So we really seek to provide all three of those things. And actually, funny to your point about guns and the gun industry and communications and how that overlap. I think we kind of got the idea, the genesis for the name came from Henry repeating arms. Like, we tossed around with the idea of like doing some kind of play on the logo, with the orange circle and the cowboy with the gun. But yeah, like Henry Repeater, like that was Mohave Repeater. That's where it came from, kind of.
Yep, and that's awesome. It's so, for people who don't quite understand what you're saying, is it's like you kind of do a full service like in-house where you'll do training, you'll set up equipment, you'll help people walk through like, oh, if you have licenses. Yeah. So where Garth and I live, we are in the land where it's fairly common for people to have business band. Mm-hmm. And like that's a common thing because large agricultural areas, business band is common because, well, getting everyone a ham license is a pain, and GMRS works, but businessman can be better.
Yeah.
And then the land of cell phones, where out here, even while I'm sitting here on a podcast, I'm using my cell phone, and I had to drive around my farm to find an actual service spot. So sometimes you have the, well, I shouldn't say you don't have the option for service. So radios really do make life a little easier on the farm, especially.
Definitely, yeah.
Yep. So for when we were going through, like you were talking about training and equipment and those types of things, how I actually first saw or came across your company was it may have been on an Instagram or something like that, and I saw your original like lunchbox repeater.
Yep.
And it was at the time I was kind of going down a rabbit hole of looking to build one myself for a GMRS setup.
Mhm.
And I was like, hey, this is just like way cleaner and neater than I would ever make it
Mhm.
because, well, I am a hack with a soldering iron. And so I guess before we start to delve into getting into that, like you talked about Henry repeaters, where the name comes from. And I realize there's people who listen to this who don't know anything about radios.
Mhm.
So correct me if I'm wrong when I start breaking this down, saying everything from like the bubble pack radios you buy at Walmart, which are FRS, but technically run on some of the GMRS frequencies as well. Uh, all of those, when you see them on the package, they'll say like 5 to 7 miles or 14 miles range or something like that.
Mhm.
And that is all in prime conditions. And if you are 100% flat
Mhm.
and, you know, have line of sight with one another.
Correct. Yeah. So the most important factor in comms, so really what I'll say to anybody that reads a stated like range off of the radio package, that is always just a BS figure that they put on there for marketing. The most important factor in any sort of communications, whether it's $1,000 handheld radio or a $25 handheld, is going to be line of sight. It's really how you plan for implementing your communications that's going to make you successful at achieving long distances. And, really what matters is the distance to the horizon and then obstructions to your line of sight along that path. So, at the distance to the horizon, any distance beyond that, if I can't see beyond that distance, the earth is going to obstruct my signal from reaching it. So,
Wait, so
that
the
concept.
earth isn't flat?
Right, exactly. Yeah, unfortunately, I'm sad to break it to you, but that's the case. But yeah, so any obstructions and your distance to the horizon is going to impact that. So basically, the greatest advantage that you can get is just elevation. Getting your signal up higher, getting up on a hill, using like a repeater to relay the signal. Those are all considerations you have to make.
Which is why you always saw radio towers like on a hill.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's weird how things that we say this like it would be kind of common sense, and you look around and like in our area, it's hey, there's a hill and there's a whole bunch of radio towers on top of it because
Yeah,
it's the highest geographical point.
yeah,
And
Mhm.
strange that would work that way because it
right.
just like anytime you get on top of something tall, you can see a lot farther. So
Mhm.
that radio signal comes down a little bit more where you can see, or it will throw it farther as well.
Right.
Or unless you live in the flats like I do, because I can see neighboring town from 30 miles away. So
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Not everyone has that. And now we're talking about that, and that's more localized radio because like
Mhm.
I'm not gonna get into talking about ham and bouncing signals off the ionosphere and
Mhm.
things like that nature because that's a whole nother conversation for another day that would be, well, interesting to some people, but incredibly boring to others.
really
Yeah,
riveting stuff you guys got going here.
definitely. Yeah.
Uh, but so as you're talking about going through, I know that we kind of just did a very basic overview of like what the radios are, and just like so you have your lunchbox repeater,
Mhm.
and kind of explain what that was and the thing that I saw that kind of turned me onto your company first because I said I was going to build one, but I never
Mhm.
explained what one was.
Yeah, so that was the original product. The lunchbox repeater was basically it's a simple two-way radio repeater that repeats analog signals, and it's called a store and forward repeater, which is one of the most simplistic types of repeater. It keeps the cost down, but basically what it does is when somebody makes a transmission to it, it records it and then retransmits it over the same channel. And so, it's just basically like an automated relay. If you place that on a tall hill that's in between you and your your person you're trying to reach, then you can bounce that signal basically over the hill, if that makes sense.
Yep. So the way this would work is it extends your network. It's just it has a repeater on top that's pretty much like someone who's playing a non-shitty version of the telephone game.
Mhm.
Like
Exactly.
they repeat exactly what you say, not which is really what kind of connects everything, even through the internet and stuff like that, because there's mesh networks and stuff like that that change how all the repeaters work. But like I got to play with a bunch of that, getting familiar with ATAC and running all those systems. But with this, where we're talking about just the basic stuff, the reason why I thought that was your system was so neat was in some of the places where we shoot, like we've got friends who do a lot of really long range stuff.
Yeah.
And okay, you can just set this up on the hill and you can still talk. You might only be driving a mile or like between the firing line and your target, but you might have to cover 3 miles of ground to get there.
Yeah.
And you can still talk to everybody as you're going out for people checking on targets or things like that.
Yeah.
And like I've had friends who go out to Utah and do the extreme long range stuff, shooting 3,000 yards and stuff like that. And they all rely heavily on comms when they do those things.
Oh yeah, definitely.
But so we talked a little bit about the repeater and what that is. The thing I am most interested in actually is some of your classes. And I'll have to see for when the next time you get somewhere closer to South Dakota is.
Yeah.
But RTO Basics is kind of your flagship course, for lack of a better term.
Yeah.
And now RTO, it to me has always been, like radio terminal operator.
Yeah.
And is that more or less what your class is set up to be, or what is? Do you just teach someone how to, the proper radio terminology, or what is it?
So I think that you kind of have to assess like what the responsibilities of the RTO are. And to me, what that looks like is for a group, you're not just the guy that is, talking on the radio, but there's more to that. So what I do is in the course, I go through the science of radio waves and how they propagate through the atmosphere and things like that. So you get an understanding of how this tool actually works and what its limitations are. Then I cover, some of the more practical things like frequency and equipment selection, where and when and how you can operate, and what equipment to choose to accomplish whatever mission that you set out to accomplish. Then where the real value I think in the course comes in is in the planning aspect. So you can talk on a radio all day long. I can hit the push to talk key and say whatever I want, but that doesn't mean my signal is going to go anywhere. So I think the value is in the planning for communications and understanding, where people are located at and how you can plan to achieve comms with them, and then implementing that in a prac app. So I have the students come together to develop a plan, and on day 2 we go out, into the woods, into the mountains, and we work with a group of like-minded folks, and everybody gets together and accomplishes the mission that they planned for.
Now, that is awesome, and you just mentioned something that I think is probably one of the most underrated and misunderstood positions that you have in talking about the importance of the RTO and what your course does. I have long said, and I've told it to a bunch of my friends, I'm like, sometimes I just need a nerd. Like, I need a commo nerd.
Oh yeah.
Because it's when I say it like that, I'm not saying anything bad about it. It's I come from the the gun side of things, and then in the operations side from my military experience. So I'm used to running, out of a 3 shop and going, all right, hey, why does this not work?
Right.
And then I hand it to someone so that my gorilla hands can mash a button and make talkie. And that's where I was at. And I'm like, I I know there's something to do with this stuff. I just don't know how to do it.
Mhm.
And one person can't learn everything.
Right.
I mean, you can try and you can be, you know, like a jack of all trades and master of none, but it is very important to have someone who understands how to do this, especially like you said, when you're setting up a plan.
Yeah.
Because I know that you can go on Amazon and buy, you know, like an 8-pack of the Baofeng, you know, UV5Rs, and then you get them and go, all right, now what felony am I going to commit with these?
Right.
And because you might not know what the FCC regs are for them or things of that nature.
Right.
And so you cover all of that stuff in your classes.
Yeah, exactly.
And what is your opinion of the venerable Baofeng?
So that's a great question. So my opinion of it is that it is a good tool to learn. When I think about I'm trying to think of like, you know, the way that I can extract the most value out of that tool and how to be, you know, realistic about it. So my opinion of it is that you can get a lot of value if you're relatively a beginner to radio stuff and that's your first introduction to the radio world. You can learn a lot with that tool. But beyond that, I think that, you know, its place is maybe in hobby or amateur radio, and if you're doing any sort of you know, outdoors work, something where you're going to need some durable equipment, then that's just not going to hold up, you know, and it just doesn't have the capabilities to, you know, help you be, number one, secure, and number two, have, you know, a pretty solid, durable piece of gear.
Yep. That's it's that entry level, like the,
Mhm.
oh, hey, you know, I'm going to kick this around on the weekends. I'm going to use, you know, try it out. And it's a low barrier to entry is
Right.
what I've seen it as.
Yeah, exactly.
And because it's, you know, great because you can plug it into Chirp on your computer and load it with GMRS or MERS, you know, and not transmit,
Mhm.
only receive,
Yeah.
you know, because the FCC is listening, maybe,
Mhm.
allegedly. And but you know, you can go through those to start to learn what some of the limitations of the radio and those things are.
Right.
And you did mention one thing earlier that I'm sure we'll come back to as we go, because my brain, you know, I have a touch of ADD sometimes and go, oh, hey, we'll come back to that.
Yeah.
But the analog system that you talked about with your repeater.
Mhm.
So I know I am aware of it because of what I've done for a living, that there's really two types of radio, and it's
Mhm.
not AM and FM,
Mhm.
but analog and digital.
Yeah.
So uh digital one, for in the most layman term I can put it, does a packet of information, a data. So it still if you're of a certain age, you probably remember when cell phones switched from analog to digital.
Mhm.
And you know, that's when you could start to do things like text
Yeah.
and all of that stuff, because you were transmitting data instead of just voice.
Yeah.
And is that the same way to look at it, or can you still send a text over analog?
So, you know, there are ways to send like text data over analog, but it's not really suited for carrying that type of information, and it's not efficient. Um, I think the biggest misconception with digital is that digital requires the internet, and that's just not the case. You know, it's still a completely austere off-grid network. You know, between two radios, just direct communications, you can still have digital communications, which is just going to be clearer. You're going to be able to achieve greater distances than you would with analog. So, you know, it doesn't require the internet, and it's still totally off grid, but it's just that much better than analog. You can do things like encryption, sending text messages, and things like that.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, and it's far easier to encrypt
Mhm.
than it is, because I know, like, as far as encryption goes, back in the day, again, going, like, we'll jump in the Wayback Machine in '03 when I was doing the invasion of Iraq,
Mhm.
and they handed us this little fold-up computer that never worked called an ANCD,
Mhm.
and we plugged it into our radios to make it get on the right frequencies to do frequency hopping and jump around. And they never worked because someone was always out of time on the network,
Yeah.
and we just ran on single channel for majority of that invasion.
Right.
But that was my first experience with looking at. I thought that was a digital radio.
Mhm. Right. Yeah. So those are those actually were analog.
Yep. And I went,
Right.
oh, this is all crap.
Yeah.
It,
Yeah.
it goes back to some of that, low end old style stuff, and having the military lowest bidder type thing, because it might not have been like a Prick 72 or something like that, but running the old Singars was a challenge at times, because that was my first taste of like real radios other than a CB. And like, I remember seeing the repeater stations that were just Humvees with a giant antenna sticking up that would
Yeah.
all over Iraq, that you'd see some two dudes out there just manning a repeater.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. The retrans station.
Yep. And was that something you had to do?
So not me personally, but I had guys that manned, retrans stations. Has to be done. You can't do the job without it.
Yep. I remember looking up and seeing those guys just being like, man, that would suck.
That sucks. Yeah.
As I cruised by at 62 miles an hour,
Yeah.
going, all
Definitely.
right, we're moving on.
Yeah.
And so we touched a little bit on digital and a little bit on analog. And in order to do the encryption, you have to do digital, correct?
Yes. That's correct.
Now, I know that there's a handful of other like neat things that you can do with digital, especially,
Mhm.
and that's like location sharing and stuff like that, where I know that you can do some of that over an analog network,
Mhm.
but it's think of it like or I guess the easiest way for a listener to think of it is like a dial-up modem,
Mhm.
where it would send a signal like that across instead of just your broadband connection.
Right. Yeah, so with analog, with some of the methods that they have to share like locations, you have like APRS, for example, which is really was originally intended as a method to transmit like weather data and locations associated with that, and stations that were reporting it. But it's not a secure methodology. It's just been co-opted by the emergency communications community. And really, the only secure way to do it is like if you're transmitting on an encrypted digital net. Like for example, with some of these high terror radios that I offer, they have GPS. You can pull your GPS grid and then send that over the net to other users, or query other users within your network for their GPS location.
Okay, so like, it's if you have this and can have radio contact with someone, then you can be the, hey, where are you? And it'll
Yes.
pop up. And does that something they always have to allow? Or is that something where if you've already had connection, you can always find them?
No, so yeah, you have to be within radio contact with them. So you can always pull
Yep.
your own GPS coordinates, but you can't send it to another user or receive, or pull from them
Yep.
without being within radio contact with them. So it's very important.
Yep. Well, I was more thinking for like anybody who does like skiing or backcountry hunting or things of that nature, where you have it where it's okay, hey, we've talked before. If I get close enough to get in radio contact, can we sync our GPS so it'll auto sync?
Yeah, so you can, yeah, definitely. So, like, let's say, for example, somebody's skiing or hunting and they go down with an injury. You can request their GPS location. As long as you build your network, so there's that
Yep.
privacy and security component to it. they're a contact within your radio, you're a contact within their radio, and you guys have matching encryption keys. You can request their GPS location, so if they go down, it's like a safety thing.
Yep.
You
So
know,
you can always find them.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Like that's one of the first radios I saw that did that wasn't a high tear. It was actually a Garmin. It was the old Garmin Rhinos.
Yeah, the rhinos, yeah. Those are
And
cool.
like they were the highest tech thing in the world in 2004.
Oh yeah.
And now I think they still make them.
Yep, they do.
I haven't seen one in a long time, so that would be,
Yeah.
you know, I've since, you know, started looking at other things, but that was the first one I saw that did that, and I went, "Oh man, that's really cool."
Yeah.
Now, have you played with as we move on, do you get into LoRa and some of that stuff for doing the other networks as well?
Yeah, so when you start to get into like data networks, right? Mesh networking is really powerful because each node that you add to the network strengthens the mesh and it increases the range and of the mesh and things like that. There's something that I've talked about on Instagram is that there's a couple different categories for mesh networking devices. There's your entry level, which would be or hobbyist, let's call it, which is like the LoRa devices. You have to buy the kits and solder them together.
Yep.
And do a little bit of software work, to get them talking. But they're really affordable, interesting open source projects. So you can learn a lot doing that. Then there's like the commercial stuff, which is like where you would see Gotenna or Beartooth.
Yep.
Those are a little bit more powerful. There's a lot of money behind the development of the software. And, they're really reliable. Like they're very good. And then you get into a higher category like this professional or like military grade category where you have stuff like Silvus Technologies Streamcaster radios, those things with 2 and 3 antennas.
Yep.
Those are pushing enough throughput to give you live streaming 4K video, like voice, internet. You can push over those rates. It's like insane the amount of data that you can handle.
Yeah, and that all just, of course, as that goes up, so does the price.
Of course, right? So yeah, your LoRa devices you might get for $50 on Amazon. The Gotennas might be $1,000, and then the Streamcasters or a similar competitor might be 10 or 15,000.
Yeah, like most people will only see those in a Grantham video.
Yeah, exactly.
or things of that nature.
Yeah,
but I always love seeing things start to progress because there is still that trickle down where eventually it becomes cheaper to the consumer.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
And you can start pushing that out. One of our other hosts couldn't be here. He's actually flying to prep for a deployment, but he developed a system called Trigger Interactive, and it's all set up on a mesh network that does data back and forth to do target acquisitions to register hits on targets.
Nice.
And awesome. It all goes back. It's Bluetooth to radio signal that's then mesh networked out, and a whole bunch of voodoo that I didn't understand because I just, oh, hey, training programs, I can do that.
Yeah.
But no, so mesh networks and digital and analog, what is the most important thing? Or I shouldn't say this as I said, I'm skipping around because my brain went, okay, yep. But what would you say the biggest reason for the average person to get into the radio or communication space would be?
So the radio, it's never like the main effort, right? Like I don't think that you should pursue radio because you think it's interesting. You should pursue radio to satisfy or to enhance your capabilities, right? To enhance your ability to do your job or whatever it is that you see as your mission. It gives you the ability to reach out up and out to outside entities if you may need to do that. It gives you the ability to create your own private networks of people that are on your team or your family. and it gives you really the ability to coordinate to where you can now reach somebody who's outside of your visual or audible hearing range. And that is just so powerful. Like one thing that I talk about, like in a military context, right? You talk about your M16, your optic, right? Those individual soldier or Marine issued items. That is a tool that might get one bullet, right? One gun on target. But a radio is something that can get 10 guns on target, or a really big freaking gun on target. You know what I mean? Like it's such a force multiplier, and it brings you so much capability that and it's so flexible, but it's really something that can help enhance your ability to do whatever it is that you set out to do.
Yep. I know that again, we're coming from South Dakota where we have a lot of wide open spaces and not a lot of people.
Yeah.
The running joke for the highway patrol was, you might outrun me, but you'll never outrun Motorola.
Yeah.
And that was much like you're talking, is it's that radio helped them do their job better.
Yeah.
Because it's just being in contact with everyone allows you to push through and then start to go. And the leaps and bounds that I've seen radio and just like personal communication devices, like beyond cell phones, make in the last 20 years has been absolutely insane.
Yeah.
Because as I said earlier, when we talked about, like I had that original B model Singars that was about a 7-pound brick, and everything was big on it. And there was, one handset that would come out to talk. And then those have gotten down now to where a handheld radio has all of the transmitting capability of those.
Right.
Where you had to have all of this giant batteries and, stuff to get the wattage and transmission and get to the right frequencies. And like, I don't think that one actually used crystals anymore, but like, I'm not that old, but moving that stuff through, communication is one of the most powerful things, and it's the biggest force multiplier I think that there is.
Yeah.
And the ability to do that is huge. So like you said, it's as long as you're moving forward to always kind of better yourself, and it's one of those like build a better foxhole, as we say, improve your fighting position, however you want to say it. You're adding another skill to your lexicon. That's where this becomes a huge thing. And I know that you and I kind of both instantly revert to talking about it in military terminology because, well, it's what we know.
Yeah.
But just for a civilian, like a civilian search and rescue team, or a group of friends that likes to get together and maybe be of the preparedness mindset, having someone come to one of these classes to kind of learn how these things go through. Because when you talk about like signal planning, would that have to do with, you said like what radios you're going to use? Does that have to do with like what environment you're in?
Yeah, absolutely. It's very important to study the environment. And we look at maps, we do, line of sight analysis and try to understand the process behind how to do that, and organize, your information flows. Like, how are you going to pass information to who and when? So yeah, it's definitely a big part of the planning for sure.
Yep. It's a very, a pace plan is something that I look at as that's a no-brainer. You just set that up anyway. But for somebody who's never heard of a pace plan, where you have your primary emergency or alternate contingency and emergency, forms of communication, you're almost breaking it down to smoke signals.
Yeah.
And that's breaking that stuff down. Do you see light bulbs really turning on, or do you have a lot of just straight civilians who've never done any of this come to your courses?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the majority of the students in the course are, civilians that are just interested in their own personal preparedness. And the course is designed for the entry level student. So people, it is a lot of information, right? Like, especially when you're talking about like the scientific principles behind radio wave propagation, it's a little dense, but I think it's all necessary because, like you said, light bulbs do turn on when people start to understand, or through their experience, they've tried to talk on a walkie-talkie once and it's never worked. They start to understand how these things operate and how to get the most out of them. I think people start to, connect the dots there and understand those things.
No, and that is awesome because I know that, like Garth before he had to leave because he was having problems with the signals, he became, he's a firefighter, so he got experience with fire radios.
Yep.
And the department he's on is actually still runs analog radios,
Mhm.
which is, small, volunteer fire departments.
Yep.
So he has a Baofeng in his house that
Yep.
is just programmed to the frequency for the fire department,
Right.
that he uses as an additional fire radio or pager,
Mhm.
just because that's actually worked better in places because it
Yeah.
had, a better antenna
Mhm.
than the one they had, or, something got broke.
Right.
And he would, it's, if you haven't started looking at that or thinking about it, it's like, I would have never even thought about that until we sat down and were talking about it one night. 'Cause I was like, oh yeah, you can use this thing as a scanner.
Right.
And it's
Yeah.
like, don't have too many beers and push that button though.
Yeah.
But the other one, so your RTO class we talked about, explain to me your urban comms course.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so the urban comms course gets into, well, number one, the RTO course is always in a rural environment. So the that differs from the urban comms because obviously you try to get into like a city, and the purpose behind that course is integrating digital radios. We're using mesh network radios. I'm using ATAC to track people and focusing more on the command and control aspect of things, which is also, equally as important, to really using radios, right? You need some kind of mission and some kind of command and control. And what we do is we send out teams, into the city, and the objective is to basically hunt like a rabbit. I'll send somebody, a runner down there, and they have to report information on that person. And then ultimately, the person who is, the ground force commander, the head of the C2 element, has to make decisions based on the information that he's getting from his teams. So, the information flow is important and all the systems that we integrate. But yeah, it's a really good look at a little bit more complex things, as opposed to the RTO basics, which is really like focusing on analog radio fundamentals and planning and things like that.
Yeah. So you said, do you actually do a fox hunt with that then?
So the fox hunt is part of really the radio direction finding course.
Yeah. Okay.
But this one is visual observation. They're observing a guy that's running around the city that has maybe a red hat on, and they're trying to track that guy.
Okay, so
yeah.
it's kind of like an exercise in situational awareness, or moving that through where you're spotting something and, doing the tracking.
Right. It's an exercise in situational awareness, but also adding that layer of friction to where now, not only situational awareness, but you have to learn how to operate as a team through your radios. And you have to connect multiple entities who need information. You have to be able to pass that information to them and make decisions. So it incorporates all of those aspects.
Also, for anyone who has never done that, that can be the biggest like hardship on the planet,
Mhm.
is explaining to someone what you're seeing over radio,
Yes.
because you're looking at something being like, it's plain as day, it's right there, how can you not see this?
Yeah.
And you don't realize that someone looking at it from a different angle that's even just a few degrees off of what you are has an entirely different picture.
Right.
And they're going,
We're trying to tell somebody, oh, he's on the north side of this intersection, on left side, right side. You don't even know where your orientation is. It's tough.
yeah, trying to say like, okay, he's turning right. Okay,
Yeah.
you're right, my right, or his right.
Right.
And that's where you start doing he's turned into the 9 o'clock.
Right.
And you start basing it at, but that's the point where you have to start learning how to talk as a team.
Uh-huh.
And that was a large portion of what I was doing for the last year, was working with people and getting them to start talking in a manner like that, where you could observe something from a set course and then see people walking to them and be like, okay, you have to turn here.
Yeah. Yeah, and those TTPs and the radio etiquette, it's so important. And just like the cohesion within your team, to have that trust just makes things so much more efficient. That trust that the other person on the receiving end is going to get what you're saying, and you're going to get what they're saying. That just makes things so much faster.
It really does. And there's only one way to gain that, and that's by doing it.
Yes.
Because it's, you can sit there and practice it on Call of Duty all you want or something like that, but it's nothing like getting out in the real world and actually doing it.
Yeah, absolutely.
And like, that's, at least from my personal experience, there's not a lot you can do beyond actually, all right, we've talked about this, now you guys got to get out here and do it.
Right.
But now, so I said the fox hunt, and you have the radio directional finding course.
Yeah.
So I know I said fox hunt because I do know a little bit about radio.
Mhm.
What is a fox hunt? Or rather, I'll try and explain it, and you tell me where I go wrong.
Okay.
A fox hunt is something that generally the term was brought up by ham radio operators, and it would be someone is transmitting and they will triangulate on a position, and they might be driving around with a goofy looking antenna or something of that nature, and they'll just be like, okay, yep, here we go. And then they would find it and move in.
Yep.
And then that's where they would find it, be like, okay. So they would locate the signal, through various methods of telemetry and triangulation, and then be able to find that individual.
Yes, 100%. Yeah, so the fox hunt is really the amateur radio term for a military practice or technique, which is radio direction finding.
Yep. So the radio direction finding course you teach people how to do this.
Mm-hmm. Yep. So with basic tools and equipment, it's starting, doing basically a RF survey and network characterization of an area, trying to identify your signals of interest, and then the techniques and the practice of actually doing different radio direction finding techniques. And then we do that as a team in the prac app on day 2, and get multiple reps at it with different, varying degrees of intensity. For example, fixed transmitter, then dynamic, and things like that. So,
no, that is cool. That sounds like that would be a lot of fun to do.
Yeah.
I know that when you're talking about like the RF survey, it's kind of like doing an area study for an environment where those are things people might not be used to hearing, where it's like, oh, like I did an area study of the town I live in. And that's more of an intelligence term to kind of figure out what it is going on, what's happening in the area, what to expect. That RF study would also be part of it, would not?
Yes, that's correct. And it is a function of intelligence. It's not really a function of radio. And that's what, like, one of the things that I think people should understand is that, like, when you're talking about roles for individuals, right, your RTO is not necessarily the same guy as the radio direction finding guy. Those are two different functions and two totally different capacities. One needs to be focused, internal on team communications, blue side tactics and comms. And the other guy needs to be focused externally on, red side adversary stuff. So, one guy is an intelligence guy, one guy is a comm guy, but they're different roles. And it's important not to mix those things.
Yeah, well, I know one of the interesting things, I read it somewhere in one of the books, and it was, I'm sure it was in a comms book that I was reading, or something about that, where they were talking about it. In the early days of the Iraq War, they would actually use a television with the sound off, to detect when coalition forces were approaching an area because the static would change on the TV because of the UHF or VHF that we were using on our radios. It would throw the static would do a different pattern, and they'd be like, "Oh, here comes the Americans," and that's just that, like, for lack of a better term, noise pollution that no one notices.
Right.
That some guy looked at and went, "Hey, this happens every time they come close." So it was an early detection system.
Right. Yeah, and that's what that's like all part of the RF survey. It's like identifying these characteristics and all the information that people put out that they don't even realize. When you're hitting that push to talk key, what kind of information is going out there and how can you exploit that? So yeah, it's super interesting when you start to look at all of the variables that at play and what information is valuable and what you can use.
Yep. So that is awesome, and these courses sound amazing. Like, I might have to see if you're doing one of these in or around SHOT Show in Las Vegas and come to one of them because that piques my interest, and I am a nerd of all sorts. So
awesome.
Like, that's the reason why I was so excited to have you on and talk to us, because I was like, these are things that are interesting to me.
Yeah,
But
definitely.
we'll move a little bit back to some of the products you have. We already talked, about the lunchbox repeater, and now I see you also have the suitcase.
Yeah, so that's a product that I haven't had the time to develop. Like, I had a beta test of that product, but the difference between the lunchbox and the suitcase was basically, or the idea for it, lunchbox was a simplex repeater, so it's store and forward. It records your transmission and then replays it, so there's that delay, and then you hear your transmission back on the net. The suitcase was a duplex repeater where it would automatically forward that traffic instantaneously, but requires two frequencies, a receive and a transmit frequency. Whereas the lunchbox is only a single frequency. It's, fixed on one simplex freak.
Yep. And I have used both of them before in different variations where it does get kind of weird when you hear yourself the first couple times when it's okay, hear it and you hear the tone back, and then you start talking, and then when you release and hear everything come back, and then you have that like 4-second delay. And then inevitably somebody tries to talk over the length of what the repeater has the capability to record.
Right. And that messes them up. Yeah.
I mean, I've never seen any of those things happen before. That's why you say things like break.
Yeah.
But the suitcase repeater, where it's a crossband, where you're talking about having the two frequencies. Now that is more common, where again you might hear yourself, but the delay will be real time, where you might hear yourself talking on a radio or a colleague's radio, but it'll be coming across a little bit. There is some latency from when you're talking on the into your mic as to what's coming out on everyone's radio after it passes through the repeater. And when you push through that stuff, like, this is all super neat and interesting, and like I said, I can nerd out on this stuff all night. But where can people find you, since we're starting to get to where we were looking at and what you had out there? And if people want to find you to look at either the lunchbox or to find one of your training classes.
Yeah, so the training is all on the website at mohaverepeater.com/training, or you can just go to mohaverepeater.com and navigate through, like the shop and the training and the blog. I think people should read the blog. It's pretty cool. But the other place that I really like people to go find is the YouTube channel, because I'm trying to put, a lot of free information out on YouTube. It takes time. It's tough to film YouTube videos because you got to edit them and plan the content and stuff like that. But I do want to continue to provide a lot of free content on YouTube, free education, and things like that. And then, just on Instagram, on Twitter, I'm on all the socials, so please get out there and connect with me. I'd be happy to answer any questions that anyone has.
Yep. And I know that I've watched some of your YouTube videos and they are super informative. Like it's helped me out looking with stuff because I do a little bit of overlanding. I do a little bit of that stuff. I do GMRS in the vehicles to
Mhm.
stay in contact with those people because, well, that's the easiest way to do it.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's better to just hit the easy button.
Yeah.
And, but it's also, I find, a really good place to start.
Mhm. Definitely.
And now I'm actually really interested to see the digital GMRS stuff that's coming out
Mhm.
since they kind of opened the door to that.
Right. Yeah, I'll be curious to see what happens.
Yep. And the company doing that's actually based out of South Dakota. So I might have to drive over and talk to them.
Yeah.
Oh, B-Tech.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're actually up here.
Okay. I didn't know that.
Yeah, well, it's one of those where they're an American company, not a Chinese company, but everything they have is it comes here and then gets sorted right back out. Like this is where the company headquarters is, but I think all the manufacturing is.
Yeah, the products are OEM in China. Yeah.
Yeah. Which is like 98% of consumer goods in America, I think.
Right.
But
Exactly. Like your iPhone.
Yeah, 100%. Like my iPhone,
Yeah.
like my computer, everything. And that's just part of the gig anymore in the world we live in.
Unfortunately, yeah.
Yep. So we have a couple ads we have to talk about quick.
Mhm.
And one of them would actually work really well with what you had or with your latest product you had talking about, because I know you talked about solar power and a lot of these things going into it. And For Patriots, our newest sponsor, you might not know this, but they don't just do survival food, but they're actually doing a ton of solar energy because national security experts are warning about our aging power grid is more vulnerable than ever. January was the third time the power stations in North Carolina were attacked and damaged by gunfire. Authorities are now checking on our grid for vulnerabilities, and they've identified 9 key substations. And if these substations are attacked, the power could be knocked out from coast to coast for up to 18 months. Imagine a blackout lasting not days, but weeks or months. Your life would be frozen in time right at the moment the power fails. Lights go out, throwing everyone into total darkness. That's why having solar power is more important than ever. With the new Patriot Power Generator 2000X, you get a solar generator that doesn't install in your house because it's portable. You can take it with you and even use it inside. It's powerful enough to run your devices, even your fridge, but yet doesn't have the smell of gas. And right now, you can use the code FRN at 4patriots.com to get 10% off your first purchase in the store. So that is one of those things that I find incredibly interesting, is running that stuff off of solar power.
Mhm.
And I know that before we developed an affiliate with them, I had a different Jackery setup that I've used for off-grid power when I needed it. And solar generators are super important and nice to have.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest factors that people overlook also in communication, I mean, people overlook a lot of stuff, but like, I think one of the biggest factors, even with experienced communicators, is that they overlook power requirements.
Because batteries weigh a ton.
They weigh a ton. And it's, not just that, but how are you going to charge that? You can only carry so many batteries, but solar power generator, like things like that, is super important to communications.
No, so I know that you'd looked at it and saw they have ports on most of your stuff for the capability to charge with things like that. And I know that I will be looking forward to watching your YouTube and seeing what else is coming out, just so you can help me with my personal journey for communications and things of that nature.
Yeah.
And with that, I would like to say thanks so much for coming on. Everyone can find you at Mohave Repeater. Again, your YouTube channel, Instagram, those types of places. And AR-15 Podcast, you can find us at AR-15 Podcast on Facebook, AR-15 Podcast 2.0 on Instagram and YouTube. And with that, you folks out there, stay safe and stay armed. Do you want to support the show? Subscribe and interact on social media. AR-15 Podcast on Instagram and YouTube. AR-15 Podcast on Facebook. AR-15 Podcast 2.0 at gmail.com if you just want to drop us a line. Find us online at firearmsradio.net. Click through our sponsors and support the people who support our show. Primary Arms, VZ Grips, Predator Armor, TacPack, and Patriot Patch Company.